Good morning and welcome to Lakewood Next Daily Devotions. Today we will continue our study through the book of Matthew by focusing on Matthew chapter 14. In Matthew chapter 14, Jesus tells about how that John the Baptist had been imprisoned by Herod because he spoke up and told Herod that what he was doing was wrong. And we read this in Matthew chapter 14, verses 3 and 4. It says, Herod had arrested and imprisoned John as a favor to his wife Herodias, the former wife of Herod's brother Philip. And John had been telling Herod, it is against God's law for you to marry her. Herod was upset because he had disobeyed God. He had married his brother's wife, and John the Baptist spoke up and said, that's wrong. That's against God's law for you to do that. And thus, John the Baptist was arrested by Herod, he was put in prison, and he was eventually beheaded because he was a spokesman for God. There's some very valuable lessons that we need to learn from John the Baptist. John was he was the son of Zachariah and Elizabeth. He was a distant cousin of Jesus. He dressed kind of strangely, wore camel's hair. He ate differently than others. He ate locusts. But most importantly, John the Baptizer was a spokesman for God. And Jesus made this statement about John the Baptist in Matthew 11, verse 11. Jesus said this, he said, I tell you the truth, of all who have ever lived, none is greater than John the Baptist. Jesus said that John the Baptist was the greatest person who ever lived. Why did Jesus say he was the greatest who ever lived? Because Jesus taught that if we want to be great in the eyes of God, we must be servants of God. And John the Baptist had a servant's attitude. He was willing to go where God wanted him to go. He was willing to say what God wanted him to say. He was willing to do what God wanted him to do because he had the attitude of a servant. Jesus said, if anyone wants to be first, he must be servant of all. I ask you today, do you have the attitude of John the Baptist? Do you have the desire to be a servant? You know, John told people that after him would come one much more powerful, much more important than him. And he could say that because he had the heart of humility. In Romans chapter 1, verse 1, Paul refers to himself as a servant of God. In 2 Peter 1:1, Peter refers to himself as a servant of God. In James 1:1, James refers to himself as a servant of God. In Revelation 1:1, John calls himself a servant of God. Each of these men, Paul and Peter and James and John, all had the attitude of a servant. They were able to do what God wanted them to do because they had the heart of a servant. I ask you today, do you have the heart of a servant? Vince Lombardi, the legendary football coach, once made this statement. He said, the difference between a successful person and others is not a lack of strength, not a lack of knowledge, but rather a lack of desires. Vince Lombardi said that he had seen many football players who were good football players. They were big and strong and fast, but he said they were not great football players because they did not have the heart of a champion. They did not have that desire to be the very, very best. John the Baptist had the desire to be the best that he could be for God by being a servant of God. He did what God wanted him to do because he saw himself as a servant. In 1 Timothy 4:12, it says, Paul wrote these words to Timothy, don't let anyone look down on you because you're young, but set the believers an example by your speech and your conduct, and your love, and your faith, and your purity. Paul was encouraging Timothy to have the attitude of a servant, but also to have the actions of a servant. He said, set an example by your conduct, by the way that you live. Set an example by your speech, by the way that you speak. Set an example by your love, by the way you love other people, by your faith in God, and by living a pure life. I ask you today, do you have the attitude of a servant? Do you have the actions of a servant? Are you seeking to be an example to others because you're totally committed to God? Let me ask you, will you talk like a servant today? Will you live like a servant today? Will you love like a servant today? Vince Lombardi also made this statement. He said, the quality of a person's life is in direct proportion to their commitment to excellence, regardless of their chosen field. Let me read that again. Vince Lombardi, the legendary football coach, said this: the quality of a person's life is in direct proportion to their commitment to excellence, regardless of their chosen field. Are you committed to excellence in the Christian life? Will you ask God today to help you to have the attitude of a servant like John the Baptist? Will you ask God to help you today to have the actions of a servant like John the Baptist?